My name is Caroline, 33 years old, and I am standing in a crowded public health clinic holding my newborn son in a faded thrift store blanket. My billionaire mother, wearing a flawless Chanel suit, just looked at me with absolute disgust and asked if $400,000 a month was not enough to buy her grandson a decent coat. When I looked her dead in the eye and told her I had not received a single dollar since my divorce, she did not hug me. She did not ask if we were starving. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called her corporate lawyers to destroy me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to survive a family that valued their public image more than your actual life. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I turned their ultimate betrayal into a federal crime. It was a freezing, rainy Tuesday afternoon in New York City. The bitter wind howled outside, rattling the frosted windows of the Chelsea Community Health Clinic. I stood in the back of the cramped waiting room, shifting my weight from one tired foot to the other. I held my infant son Leo tightly against my chest. He was wrapped in a faded gray blanket that barely kept out the damp chill of the room. The air smelled sharply of industrial bleach and wet wool coats. Babies were crying. Exhausted parents stared blankly at the flickering fluorescent lights above. I was just there to get Leo his routine immunizations because I could no longer afford private pediatric care. Suddenly, the heavy glass clinic doors swung wide open. The chaotic noise of the waiting room instantly evaporated. In walked my mother, Diana. She was a vision of severe, intimidating wealth. Her tailored tweed Chanel suit was immaculate, completely untouched by the miserable weather outside. A diamond brooch glinted under the harsh clinic lights. A small army of clinic administrators and public relations assistants hovered nervously around her. She was the chairwoman of our family investment fund, and she was there doing a highly publicized walkthrough of the very medical facility her charitable foundation had just sponsored. She was smiling for a photographer when her gaze swept the crowded room and locked onto me. I watched the fake philanthropic warmth vanish from her face instantly. It was replaced by a familiar look of absolute contempt. The same look she gave me when I chose to study forensic accounting instead of joining the family hedge fund. The same look she gave me when she sided with my cheating ex-husband during our bitter separation. She broke away from her entourage and marched directly toward me. Her expensive leather heels clicked sharply against the cheap linoleum floor. The clinic director tried to follow her, but she held up one manicured hand, stopping him dead in his tracks. She stopped inches away from me. Her eyes scanned my scuffed winter boots, my dark under-eye circles, and the cheap pilling fabric of Leo's blanket. She did not reach out to touch her grandson. She did not ask if I was healthy. "What in the world are you doing here, looking like a common street beggar, Caroline?" she hissed. Her voice was low, but the vicious tone sliced through the quiet room. "You are embarrassing me in front of the board." I tightened my grip on Leo. "I am getting my son vaccinated, Mother. This is the only clinic I can afford." Diana let out a sharp, cruel laugh that made a nearby nurse flinch. "Do not play the victim with me. It is pathetic. I know exactly how much the family trust pays out for your little post-divorce settlement. Was not $400,000 a month enough for you? Could you really not spare a few $100 to buy my grandson a decent coat instead of dragging him to a charity ward?" The administrators standing a few feet away exchanged shocked whispers. The entire waiting room was staring at us, weighing the contrast between my worn-out clothes and the massive sum of money she had just shouted out. I did not cry. I did not shrink back. The years of being the family scapegoat had burned away any tears I had left. I looked directly into her cold, judgmental eyes. I spoke with absolute, terrifying clarity. "Since the day you forced me out of the family estate and made me sign those divorce papers, I have not received a single dollar from you, the trust, or anyone else." Her jaw tightened. Without a word, she pulled out her phone and immediately dialed her corporate lawyer. Less than 20 minutes later, a sleek black town car screeched to a halt outside the clinic. Richard, the lead counsel for my mother's billion-dollar enterprise, practically sprinted through the sliding glass doors. His designer trench coat was soaked from the freezing rain, and he was clutching a thick leather briefcase to his chest as if his life depended on it. He looked frantically around the waiting room before spotting my mother standing over me, like a judge ready to deliver a death sentence. Richard scrambled over his face, pale and slick with sweat. He did not even bother to acknowledge me or the fact that I was holding a freezing infant. He unlatched his briefcase with shaking hands and pulled out a thick stack of bank statements printed on heavy watermarked paper. Diana snatched the papers from him. She flipped to the last page and aggressively shoved it into my face. "Are you going to look me in the eye and deny this is your signature, Caroline?" she demanded, her voice echoing off the cheap clinic walls. "Are you really going to stand here dressed like a vagrant and pretend you did not authorize these transfers?" I looked down at the document. It was a wire authorization form. The amount printed near the bottom was staggering. $400,000 transferred on the first of every single month since my divorce was finalized. And right there on the signature line in blue ink was a perfect replica of my handwriting. I stared at the forgery. The audacity of it was almost impressive. "This is a fake," I said calmly, refusing to break eye contact with my mother. "I never signed this, and I certainly never received a dime of this money." "You are being robbed, Mother." Diana let out a sound of pure disgust. "Do not insult my intelligence. You have always been a manipulative liar, Caroline. You have always been a problem child since the day you realized you could never measure up to your sister. Melanie runs a national charity and carries herself with grace. You drain your family dry and then show up in a place like this to play the tragic martyr. You are just like you were at 18, reckless, selfish, and desperate for attention." Richard adjusted his glasses, looking at me with a mix of pity and contempt. "Caroline, we have the routing logs. The money left the trust and went directly into an LLC you established. If you are trying to hide assets to manipulate the divorce settlement, this is federal fraud. We will hand these documents over to the authorities." The clinic staff and patients were watching us like we were a reality television show. My mother stood tall, triumphant in her cruel narrative. She was waiting for me to break down. She was waiting for the rebellious, inadequate daughter to fall to her knees and confess. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not defend my character or bring up Melanie's fake perfection. I shifted Leo to my left hip, supporting his fragile head, and reached out with my free right hand. I pulled the stack of papers from Richard's trembling grip. "I am a forensic accountant, Richard. I spent 10 years tracking offshore embezzlement for Fortune 500 companies before I retired to have my son. Did you really think you could just wave a piece of paper in my face and intimidate me?" I flipped past the signature page and went straight for the raw data. The banking metadata. The routing logs. It took my trained eyes exactly 4 seconds to find the fatal flaw in their perfect little trap. I traced my index finger down the column of routing numbers until I hit the receiving bank's SWIFT code. I smiled. It was a small, razor-sharp smile that made Richard take a physical step back. "You are slipping, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You brought me the summarized client statement. You should have checked the raw transfer logs." Diana frowned, her confidence wavering for a fraction of a second. "What are you babbling about?" I tapped the paper, tapped the boom. "The money did not go to a domestic holding account. Look at the 7th digit of this routing number. It is a 3. Domestic transfers within our trust network use a 0. This money was routed through a correspondent bank in Delaware before being bounced back into a commercial real estate holding company." Richard froze. His eyes darted to the numbers I was pointing at. I leaned in closer to my mother, letting the reality of my words sink into her manicured world. "I have been locked out of my bank accounts for 6 months. I have no credit cards. I do not even have a driver's license with a current address. So tell me, Mother, how exactly did I pay the state filing fees to open a corporate entity in Delaware?" Diana scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard I thought she might lose her balance. "You always have an excuse. You always have some convoluted story to make yourself the victim. Do you really expect me to believe you do not have a secret stash of cash somewhere? You probably stole Trent's credit cards before you abandoned your marriage. Or maybe you pawned the jewelry I gave you for your wedding. You are hiding the money to extort this family, Caroline. You want me to feel sorry for you, so I will write you another check. That is what this whole pathetic display is about. I shifted my weight, pulling the faded blanket tighter around Leo as he shifted in his sleep. I have not worn a piece of jewelry since the day Trent changed the locks on our apartment. And as for extorting the family, I do not want your money. I want you to open your eyes. You are a billionaire investment chairwoman mother. You run a massive fund. You know exactly how corporate formations work. You cannot just call up the state of Delaware and open an anonymous shell company with pocket change. It requires a registered agent. It requires notarized identification. It requires a verifiable physical address and a digital footprint. I have been living in a cash-only motel for 6 months. I do not even have an active cell phone contract. Diana stepped closer, her voice dropping to a vicious hiss. Stop lying. You are a forensic accountant. If anyone knows how to hide money, it is you. You set this up to drain the trust, and now you are playing games to get even more. You are a disgrace to this family. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked on Richard. He was the corporate counsel. He was the one whose law license was on the line if he processed fraudulent wire transfers. Look at the documents, Richard. Pull the state registry. If I open that company, my name will be on the operating agreement. But it is not, is it? Someone else set up that receiving account. Someone who had access to my personal information, my signature, and the trust routing numbers. Richard swallowed hard. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the harsh fluorescent light of the clinic. He looked at my mother, then back at the papers in his hand. The absolute certainty in my voice was finally piercing through his arrogance. He knew I was right. The metadata did not match the narrative he had been spoon-fed. Richard tucked the papers under his arm and pulled his iPad from the leather briefcase. His fingers flew across the glass screen as he logged into the secure legal database. The waiting room was entirely silent now. Even the clinic nurses had stopped pretending to work, captivated by the high-stakes drama unfolding in their lobby. What are you doing? Richard? Diana snapped, her patience completely gone. Put that away and call the police. She is committing fraud. I want her arrested right now. I will not have her parading around this city making us look like fools. Just a moment, Diana. Richard muttered, his voice trembling slightly. I just need to verify the registered agent on file for this Delaware entity. It will only take a second. Diana crossed her arms, tapping her expensive heel impatiently. This is ridiculous. She is playing you, Richard. She is manipulating the situation just like she always does. Melanie warned me about this. She said Caroline would try to turn this around on us. I stayed perfectly still, waiting for the digital guillotine to fall. Richard's eyes darted across the iPad screen as the database loaded the corporate filing. I watched his face closely. First came the confusion. His brow furrowed. He blinked rapidly as if the screen was blurry. Then came the shock. All the color drained from his face in a matter of seconds. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. What is it? Diana demanded, stepping forward to look over his shoulder. Who is the registered agent? Is it one of her shady accountant friends? Tell me right now so I can ruin them. Richard slowly looked up from the screen. His hands were shaking so violently he almost dropped the tablet. He could not look my mother in the eye. Diana, he whispered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. The registered agent is not Caroline. The physical address attached to this shell company does not belong to her. Whose is it? Diana yelled. Richard swallowed audibly. It is Jamal. The address is registered directly to your son-in-law's private wealth management firm. Diana stared at Richard, as if he had just spoken a foreign language. The silence in the clinic was deafening. Then a sharp, humorless laugh erupted from her throat. That is absurd. she snapped, her voice trembling with forced confidence. Jamal manages billions. He is a respected attorney and my son-in-law. Why would he bother with a miserable 400,000 a month? This is a clerical error. Or another one of your elaborate framing attempts, Caroline. Richard tried to speak, but she silenced him with a vicious wave. We are not doing this here, she hissed, her eyes darting nervously to the clinic nurses, who were desperately pretending not to listen to our very public argument. We are going to the penthouse right now. Jamal and Melanie are already there for our weekly briefing. We are going to clear this up face to face. Get your things now. You are coming with me. I adjusted Leo against my shoulder. I am not going anywhere with you. My son needs his checkup. You will get in the car unless you want me to call family services and report you as an unfit mother, she threatened. Do not test me today. I looked at the frail, shivering baby in my arms. A legal battle with my mother would end with me in handcuffs and Leo in foster care. With a heavy sigh, I followed her out into the freezing rain. Her driver rushed forward with a black umbrella shielding Diana, while letting the icy downpour soak my shoulders. I climbed into the cavernous back seat of the Maybach. The air inside smelled of expensive leather and vanilla. It was jarringly warm compared to the brutal winter streets. As the heavy car pulled away from the curb, sliding seamlessly into traffic, the tension inside the cabin was thick. Richard sat silently up front, aggressively typing on his phone, like he was preparing for a corporate massacre. Diana sat as far away from me as possible, staring out the window. Then she turned her sharp gaze back to me. I almost pity you, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. You had everything. A brilliant career you threw away. A supportive family you alienated. And you had Trent. A man who bent over backward to accommodate your endless neuroses. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. Trent is a pathological liar and a serial cheater mother. Diana let out an exasperated sigh. There you go again, deflecting, blaming everyone else. Trent has been an absolute saint throughout this entire ordeal. Do you have any idea what that man has been through? He came to my office in tears last month. He told me how you drained your joint savings account before disappearing into the city without a trace. He told me how you refused to seek professional help for your postpartum depression. He even begged me to keep funding your trust so you would not end up on the streets. He wanted to make sure you were safe even after the horrific way you treated him. He filed the paperwork to ensure the money went to an account you controlled. He worked directly with Jamal to protect your assets from your own reckless spending habits. She shook her head, looking at me with pure disappointment. Trent and Jamal spent weeks organizing that transfer to keep you afloat, and this is how you repay them. By accusing Jamal of fraud. You are sick, Caroline. You need serious psychiatric intervention. Her words hit me like a physical blow, but not for the reason she intended. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind. Trent filed the paperwork. Jamal processed the corporate entity. Melanie kept my mother distracted with her fake charity work and constant complaints about my behavior. It was not just one greedy ex-husband or one corrupt wealth manager. It was a perfectly synchronized multi-million-dollar syndicate. They had formed a triad to siphon my divorce settlement, using my estrangement from the family as the perfect cover. They were bleeding the trust dry, blaming my supposed mental instability, and my mother was eating out of the palms of their hands. The Maybach glided into the underground parking garage of my mother's luxury building. The engine purred into silence. The driver opened the door, letting in the cool, sterile air of the concrete structure. Diana stepped out, marching toward the private elevator without looking back. I followed her slowly, holding Leo tight against my chest. As we approached the polished steel doors of the penthouse elevator, I reached into the deep pocket of my worn coat. Without breaking my stride or changing my blank expression, I pressed the side button on my phone and stealthily activated the hidden audio recorder. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the sprawling expanse of my mother penthouse. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the rain-soaked city below. The luxury of the room felt suffocating. I stepped out onto the plush carpet, keeping my hand buried deep in my coat pocket, my thumb resting near the microphone of my recording phone to catch every word. Waiting for us in the vast living room were Jamal and Melanie. Jamal looked like he had walked off the cover of a financial magazine. As a top-tier wealth manager, his custom-tailored navy suit draped perfectly over his athletic frame. He stood with the effortless, arrogant posture of a man who believed he owned the entire world. Beside him sat my older sister, the beautiful Melanie. She was the absolute picture of Upper East Side perfection, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater and a look of deep, practiced concern. Diana did not even bother taking off her coat. She marched toward them, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Tell them," Diana loudly barked. "Tell them the insane accusations you threw at Richard in the clinic lobby today. She thinks you are stealing her divorce settlement, Jamal." She actually stood there in her rags and accused my son-in-law of wire fraud. Jamal did not flinch. Instead, he offered me a look of profound, patronizing pity. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked toward me, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the rug. "Caroline," he said, his voice incredibly calm. "We were hoping to avoid this confrontation, but considering your erratic behavior over the last few months, your paranoia is exactly what we anticipated." I tightened my grip on Leo. "I am not paranoid, Jamal. I am looking at the routing data. You set up the Delaware LLC to funnel my trust money." Jamal sighed. He walked to the glass coffee table and picked up a thick manila folder. He opened it and pulled out a stack of medical documents bearing the official letterhead of a prominent psychiatric clinic. "As the fiduciary executor of the family trust and the primary wealth manager for your estate, I have a legal obligation to protect your assets, especially when you are incapacitated," Jamal said, easily sliding into his aggressive legal jargon. "Under the terms of the irrevocable trust, if the beneficiary exhibits signs of severe mental decline, the trustee has the right to establish a temporary conservatorship and execute a durable power of attorney to prevent the mismanagement of funds." He handed the documents to my mother. Diana took them, her eyes scanning the pages quickly. "What is this?" I demanded, though my voice remained steady. "It is an independent psychological evaluation," Jamal stated loudly, ensuring my phone caught every single word. "Conducted by Dr. Eris Thorne. Based on testimony from your ex-husband Trent, your family, and your documented history of financial recklessness, the medical consensus is clear. You are suffering from severe postpartum psychosis with extreme paranoid delusions." I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You forged a medical diagnosis." "I did not forge anything," Jamal replied smoothly, his eyes flashing with a predatory gleam. "You drained your accounts. You isolated yourself. You are standing in a billionaire penthouse dressed like a homeless person, clutching an infant and making wild, unsubstantiated claims about multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. You are not a forensic accountant right now, Caroline. You are a severely ill woman who has lost her grip on reality. The money you think is missing was simply moved into a protected, locked account to keep you from destroying your own future. You signed the authorization yourself during one of your manic episodes. You just do not remember it. It was a masterful lie. He was using the very symptoms of the poverty he forced upon me as proof of my insanity. He was gaslighting my mother, creating a flawless legal shield. If anyone investigated the missing money, Jamal would just show them this fake medical file and claim he was protecting a crazy woman's finances. Before I tore his argument apart, Melanie stood up from the sofa. Her eyes were suddenly brimming with tears. She pressed her hands to her mouth, letting out a choked sob. She rushed over to Diana and grabbed our mother's arm. "Mom, we cannot let her leave with the baby," Melanie cried, her voice cracking with perfect theatrical terror. "Look at her eyes. She is completely detached from reality. If she thinks we are all conspiring against her, what will she do to him? What if she hurts him to get back at us? You have to take Leo away from her mom. You have to take the baby right now before she does something unthinkable." Diana wrapped her arms around Melanie, her face hardening with a terrifying resolve. Before she could issue the command to have my son ripped from my arms, the heavy oak double doors of the penthouse swung open. Trent walked in. My cheating ex-husband looked like he had just stepped out of a luxury lifestyle magazine. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat, his hair perfectly styled, his expression twisted into a mask of profound, agonizing concern. He rushed across the sprawling living room, completely ignoring me, and went straight to my mother. "Diana. Thank goodness you found her." Trent breathed, his voice thick with fabricated emotion. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, playing the part of the devoted family man perfectly. "I have been out of my mind with worry. I have been driving around the city for days looking for them. I even hired private investigators." Diana looked at him with nothing but sympathy. "Trent, I am so sorry. You were right about everything. She is completely unstable." Trent turned his gaze to me, playing the role of the heartbroken savior to absolute perfection. "Caroline, why are you doing this to us?" he pleaded loudly, ensuring Jamal and Melanie were watching his masterful performance. "Why did you empty our joint savings account and disappear into the night I wanted to get you help? I begged you to go to the psychiatric facility Jamal recommended, but you just took the cash and vanished into the streets. You are endangering our little boy by living in cheap motels." I tightened my grip on Leo, feeling the steady beat of his tiny heart against my chest. "You drained the joint account to pay off your massive gambling debts, Trent," I said evenly, refusing to raise my voice. "And then you changed the locks on our apartment while I was at the hospital, giving birth to the son you never wanted." Trent let out a long, heavy sigh, shaking his head, as if my words were just tragic symptoms of my supposed illness. He looked at Diana with sad puppy dog eyes. "You see what I have to deal with, Diana? The delusions are getting worse. She actually believes these wild fantasies. She is projecting her own financial crimes onto me." He reached inside his overcoat and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents clipped together with a heavy brass fastener. He bypassed me entirely and handed the papers directly to my wealthy mother. "What is this?" Diana asked, looking at the bold legal print stamped on the front page. "It is an emergency ex parte custody order," Jamal interjected smoothly, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Trent. As Trent's legal counsel, he came to my firm when he realized how severely her mental health had deteriorated. I helped him file the emergency petition. A family court judge signed off on it this morning based on the psychological evaluation and the concrete evidence of her financial erraticism. It grants Trent immediate full physical and legal custody of Leo. My blood ran cold. They had thought of absolutely everything. The forged wire transfers, the fake medical records, and now a legally binding court order designed to legally kidnap my child. Jamal had weaponized his prestige and his formidable law license to build a cage so tight I was never supposed to escape. They were using the legal system as a weapon of mass destruction against a mother who they thought had zero resources to fight back. Diana scanned the document, her eyes gleaming with a twisted sense of righteous victory. "This is exactly what needs to happen," she declared firmly. "Trent, you take the baby. I will have my security team escort Caroline to the psychiatric ward at Mount Sinai. She will not leave until the doctors sign off on a full mental rehabilitation program. This nightmare ends today." Trent stepped closer to me. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the penthouse climate control system. Diana, Jamal, and Melanie all focused their attention on the legal papers in my mother's hands, thoroughly distracted by their own brilliance. Trent reached out, pretending to offer me a gentle, comforting hug for the benefit of his captive audience. He wrapped his arms tightly around my shoulders, trapping me in his sickeningly expensive cologne. But as his face pressed against my ear, the heartbroken facade instantly vanished. "You are going to hand over the kid right now, you pathetic loser?" Trent whispered, his voice a vile, gloating hiss that only I could hear. "We own your mother. We own your money. If you fight this custody order, Jamal will have you locked in a padded cell by midnight, and I will make sure you never see this brat again." I pulled back from Trent, my expression hardening into absolute stone. I did not scream. I did not claw at his perfectly groomed face, even though every maternal instinct in my body screamed at me to tear him apart. I simply tightened my arms around Leo and took a deliberate step away from the three of them. Diana misinterpreted my silence. She saw it as the stubborn, rebellious defiance she had always hated in me. "Give him the baby, Caroline," Diana commanded, her voice cracking like a whip across the vast living room. "Stop making this harder than it has to be. You are sick. You are not fit to care for a child in this condition. Trent has the legal right to take him, and you are going to go with Jamal to the hospital to get the help you desperately need." "I am not going to any hospital," I said, my voice eerily calm, ringing clear over the hidden microphone still recording in my pocket. "And neither of you is taking my son. This custody order is built on fraudulent medical evaluations and stolen funds." Melanie let out a theatrical gasp, burying her face in her hands. "She is completely delusional, Mom. She is going to hurt the baby." That was the final straw for my mother. Diana drew herself up to her full height, her eyes blazing with a terrifying mixture of pity and absolute rage. She walked over to the console table and pressed the intercom button connecting directly to the building security desk. "I need 3 guards up to the penthouse immediately," Diana said coldly into the speaker. "We have an intruder who needs to be escorted off the premises." "Mom, you cannot just throw her out on the street," Melanie whined, playing the compassionate sister role to the very end. "She needs to be committed." "She has made her choice," Diana snapped, turning her freezing glare back to me. "I have spent my entire life trying to fix you, Caroline. I gave you every advantage, every opportunity, and you squandered it all because of your endless jealousy and paranoia. You stole from this family. You abandoned your husband. You refused to accept the help we are so generously offering you." Jamal stepped forward, adjusting his tie with a look of smug satisfaction. "Diana, from a legal standpoint, if she leaves the premises with the child defying a court order, she is committing a felony. We can just have the police arrest her at the lobby level." "No police," Diana ordered sharply, prioritizing her precious public image over everything else. "I will not have my name dragged through the tabloids because my psychotic daughter was arrested in my lobby. Get her out of my building quietly." She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at my chest. "As of this exact second, you are cut off. I am instructing Jamal to freeze the trust entirely. You will not receive another dime from the family fund. You are no longer my daughter. If you ever set foot near me, my company, or Melanie, ever again, I will let Jamal unleash every lawyer in his firm to destroy you." The heavy elevator doors dinged open, and 3 burly security guards stepped into the penthouse. They looked uncomfortable but determined, moving quickly to surround me. "Escort her out," Diana commanded, turning her back to me completely. "If she tries to come back inside, use whatever force is necessary." Trent smirked, giving me a tiny mocking wave as the guards moved in. I did not fight them. I did not give Jamal the satisfaction of looking like a deranged woman resisting security. I held Leo close, turned on my heel, and walked straight into the elevator, flanked by the massive guards. The ride down to the lobby was dead silent. The guards practically shoved me through the revolving glass doors, leaving me standing on the freezing pavement. The icy rain had turned into a bitter, driving snow. The wind cut right through my thin coat, chilling me to the bone. Pedestrians hurried past, ignoring the woman standing in the freezing cold holding a baby. I slowly turned around and looked up at the towering glass skyscraper. I tracked my eyes all the way up to the glowing lights of the penthouse balcony. They were up there right now, drinking expensive scotch, celebrating their flawless victory. They thought they had successfully stripped me of my money, my family, and my power. They thought they had left me with absolutely nothing. I reached into my pocket and stopped the audio recording. I immediately saved the digital file to a highly secure cloud server. A small, dangerous smile slowly spread across my face. I was not defeated. I was just calculating my next move. I pulled my coat tight against the biting wind and walked away from my mother's towering skyscraper. The snow was falling harder now, coating the New York sidewalks in a thick layer of freezing slush. I kept my head down, shielding Leo from the harsh weather, and navigated the busy streets until I spotted the glowing neon sign of a small diner a few blocks away. The bell above the door chimed as I pushed my way inside. The air was thick with the smell of fried grease and stale coffee, a sharp contrast to the vanilla-scented penthouse I had just been thrown out of. I slid into a cracked vinyl booth in the far back corner, hidden away from the large front windows. A tired waitress wandered over, wiping her hands on a stained apron. I ordered a single cup of black coffee, paying with the last few crumpled dollar bills in my pocket. Once she walked away, I gently laid Leo down on the padded bench beside me, using my coat to fashion a makeshift bed. He was completely exhausted from the chaos of the afternoon and fell asleep almost instantly. With my son safe and out of the freezing cold, I reached into my canvas tote bag. I bypassed the diapers and baby wipes, pulling out a heavy matte black laptop. It was not a standard consumer model. It was a military-grade encrypted machine I had built myself during my peak years tracking offshore embezzlement syndicates. I opened the lid. Instead of a standard operating system, a black terminal screen blinked to life. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering a complex string of command line codes to bypass the primary firewall and boot up a secure virtual machine. I connected to the public router through a triple-layered encrypted proxy network. Once the secure connection was fully established, I pulled up the audio file I had just saved to my private cloud server. I put in a single wireless earbud and hit play. The pristine audio quality captured every arrogant word spoken in the penthouse. I heard Jamal using his slick legal jargon to validate the forged medical records. I heard Melanie faking her dramatic tears. I heard Trent whispering his vile, gloating threat right into my ear. I did not just listen like a helpless victim. I listened like a seasoned forensic investigator. I opened a sophisticated spectrogram analysis program and began isolating their vocal frequencies. I meticulously tagged every instance where Jamal explicitly admitted to coordinating the funds transfer and freezing the trust. I was building a legally admissible evidence chain, timestamping their exact confessions of fraud. Jamal actually thought he was a genius. He believed his prestigious law degree and his customized suits made him completely untouchable. He assumed that because I was a sleep-deprived mother dressed in worn-out clothes, my brain had simply stopped functioning. But forensic accounting is not just about balancing corporate ledgers. It is about understanding human greed. It is about recognizing the highly predictable patterns arrogant people leave behind when they think nobody is watching them. I closed the audio file and opened a dark web browser. It was time to look at the financial architecture of their trap. Jamal had proudly bragged about moving my $400,000 monthly payments into a secure Delaware holding company. He thought he had completely outsmarted the system by purchasing an aged anonymous shell corporation from a premium corporate broker to launder the trust money. What Jamal did not know was how the high-end corporate brokerage world actually operated behind closed doors. I typed a lengthy numerical Internet Protocol address into the browser, bypassing standard Internet protocols entirely. A stark login prompt suddenly appeared on a completely blank gray screen. There were no corporate logos, no password recovery options, and no helpful error messages. It was a hidden ghost server, completely invisible to anyone who did not possess the exact cryptographic key. I took a slow sip of my terrible diner coffee. I cracked my knuckles, feeling a massive surge of pure, calculated adrenaline. I carefully typed in a 40-character alphanumeric password that I had memorized 5 years ago. The screen flashed a bright green. Access was granted. Rows of complex financial routing data flooded the display. I was looking directly at the internal ledger of the exact Delaware holding company Jamal had used to steal my money. He thought he bought a clean, untraceable shell company to perfectly hide his crimes. He had no idea that I was the anonymous founder who created and seeded that specific corporate entity half a decade ago during an undercover audit. Jamal had not locked me out of my money. He had walked through my front door. I stared quietly at the glowing green lines of code cascading down my laptop screen. The internal ledger of Apex Holdings, the Delaware shell company I created 5 years ago, was completely exposed. Jamal had not just walked through my front door. He had handed me the master keys to his entire criminal enterprise. I typed a quick command to filter the incoming transaction logs by amount. Immediately, a perfect, unbroken column of numbers populated the screen. $400,000. Deposited on the first of every month for the past 12 months. $4.8 million of my money stolen right out from under my mother's nose, sitting neatly in the digital ledger. I watched the cursor blink at the bottom of the column. This was the exact proof I needed, but it was not enough to put Jamal behind bars for the rest of his life. Embezzlement was a state-level crime, and Jamal had the legal resources to drag a civil lawsuit out for decades. I needed to see exactly where the money went next. I needed to find the laundering mechanism. The diner waitress walked past my table offering a refill of the bitter coffee. I politely declined. Jamal had meticulously forged my own personal signature, presenting it to my mother as undeniable proof of my reckless spending. But the movement of digital money always leaves a clear trail. I ran a trace script on the outgoing wire transfers. Jamal was smart, but he was arrogant. He assumed the Delaware firewall was impenetrable, so he got lazy with his secondary layering. The money did not sit in Apex Holdings for long. Within 48 hours of each monthly deposit, the funds were fractured into dozens of smaller payments and dispersed across a network of secondary shell corporations. I tracked the digital footprints across 3 different states, watching the money bounce from a fake consulting firm in Nevada to an empty holding trust in Wyoming. It was a classic placement and layering strategy designed to confuse auditors and bury the original source of the funds. But I was not a standard auditor. I was the architect of the very trap he was using. I ran a reverse IP lookup on the authorization signatures for the secondary transfers. Every single one pinged back to the secure servers at Jamal's wealth management firm in Manhattan. He was executing the trades from his own office. He was so confident in his untouchable status as the golden son-in-law that he casually routed my stolen inheritance through dummy accounts with the click of a mouse. After 3 hours of forensic work, I finally found the integration phase. All the laundered funds from Nevada and Wyoming were funneling back into a single commercial bank account in New York. I pulled the public records for the account holder. It was a property development syndicate. I cross-referenced the corporate officers, and there it was. Melanie was listed as the primary philanthropic partner, using her charity as a tax-exempt shield for the project. Jamal was the managing director. They were using my stolen divorce settlement to secretly fund the construction of a sprawling, ultra-luxury eco-resort in the Hamptons. It was a $50 million development, and they were pumping my cash into the foundation to artificially inflate their investor equity. Trent was listed on the payroll as a senior consultant, pulling a massive salary paid directly from the stolen trust funds. They were building an empire with my stolen inheritance, laughing at my supposed insanity while they poured my money into oceanfront concrete. They had played my mother perfectly, draining her accounts to build their own private kingdom. The audacity was breathtaking. I leaned back in the cracked vinyl diner booth, rubbing my tired eyes. Leo stirred next to me, letting out a soft sigh in his sleep. I brushed a curl from his forehead. They thought they had destroyed his future to build their luxury resort. They had absolutely no idea the level of devastation I was about to rain down on them. I had more than just theft. I had definitive, undeniable proof of a multi-state money laundering syndicate. I exported the entire transaction history, the IP logs, and the corporate registry files onto an encrypted flash drive. I closed the terminal window and shut the laptop. I pulled out my burner phone, a device untraceable by Jamal's security team. I dialed a 10-digit number with a Washington, D.C. area code. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered on the other end. "Special Agent Keller," I said, keeping my voice low and steady against the background noise of the diner. "It is Caroline. The wire fraud just crossed state lines. It is federal now." 2 weeks passed. I spent every single hour of those 14 days working directly with Special Agent Keller and his elite financial crimes unit. We built an airtight, bulletproof federal case. We mapped every stolen dollar, every forged signature, and every shell company. Keller secured the federal subpoenas, but we both knew that arresting Jamal in his office would be too quiet. He would use his high-priced lawyers to spin the narrative, claiming a simple corporate misunderstanding. I did not want a quiet arrest. I wanted a highly public execution. I wanted my mother and the entire New York high society to watch his carefully constructed empire burn to the ground. The perfect opportunity arrived on a crisp Saturday evening. The Hamptons Country Club was an exclusive fortress of old money and generational wealth. Tonight, it was completely transformed into a winter wonderland for the apex of the social season. Jamal and Melanie were hosting their highly anticipated winter gala. It was a massive, glittering event designed to officially unveil their $50 million eco-resort project. The ballroom was draped in white silk and dripping with crystal chandeliers. Waiters in pristine tuxedos carried silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and imported caviar. Every billionaire hedge fund manager and prominent socialite in the tri-state area was in attendance to celebrate the new development. I arrived at the country club in the back of a rented black luxury SUV, leaving Leo safely at home with a highly vetted former military nanny. I stepped out into the freezing night air. I was no longer the exhausted, shivering woman in the faded thrift store coat. I was dressed for a funeral. Theirs. Inside the grand ballroom, the string quartet faded into silence. A spotlight hit the main stage. Jamal stepped up to the crystal podium, looking like a king surveying his conquered lands. He wore a custom velvet tuxedo jacket, exuding effortless charm and absolute arrogance. The crowd applauded as he flashed his signature-winning smile. Melanie stood off to the side wearing a heavy diamond necklace paid for by my stolen trust funds, playing the part of the devoted philanthropic wife. Trent was seated at the VIP table in the front row, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey, pretending he actually belonged among the financial elite. My mother Diana sat right next to him, beaming with overwhelming pride at her golden son-in-law. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Jamal began, his deep, commanding voice echoing through the massive room. "We are not just building a luxury resort, we are building a permanent legacy. In a world that is constantly shifting, there is only one thing that truly matters: family. The bonds we share, the unshakable trust we build, and the sacrifices we make to protect the ones we love. This real estate project is a shining testament to those core family values. It is a symbol of transparency, integrity, and sustainable growth for the future." The sheer hypocrisy of his words was almost intoxicating. He was standing on an illuminated stage lecturing the wealthiest people in New York about family values and transparency, while actively laundering $5 million he stole from his own sister-in-law. He paused for dramatic effect, soaking in the adoring gaze of my mother and the polite, enthusiastic applause of the billionaire investors. And that is why Jamal continued raising his crystal glass high into the air. "I am so incredibly proud to stand beside my beautiful wife Melanie and officially announce the groundbreaking of our brand new project." He did not get to finish his speech. I gave a sharp nod to the venue manager standing by the entrance. He immediately signaled the catering staff, and the massive carved oak double doors of the grand ballroom were violently thrown open. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot over the premium sound system. Every single head in the cavernous room turned toward the entrance. I stepped over the threshold and walked directly into the blinding light of the chandeliers. The whispers started instantly. I ignored them, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my gaze locked onto Jamal. I was wearing a breathtaking floor-length black designer gown with a daring neckline and a thigh-high slit that radiated pure, unapologetic power. My hair was sleek and perfectly styled by a top-tier professional, But the most important statement piece was wrapped securely around my left wrist, a limited edition platinum Patek Philippe watch. It was horological art worth more than most of the luxury cars parked outside. It was a subtle, aggressive signal to every wealth manager in that room that I was absolutely not a charity case. The entire room fell completely silent as I walked slowly and deliberately forward. The sea of tailored suits and silk dresses parted for me like Moses dividing the Red Sea. I did not look like the broken, destitute mother they had been gossiping about over their expensive cocktails. I looked like a woman who owned the building. Melanie recovered from her initial shock faster than anyone else. I saw the sheer panic flash across her perfectly contoured face before it morphed into sheer rage. She whispered something frantic to Jamal, dropped her crystal champagne flute onto a passing waiter tray, and marched directly toward me. Her heavy diamond necklace caught the light sparkling brightly as she closed the distance. She intercepted me just before I reached the center of the ballroom floor. She stepped directly into my path, forcing me to stop. "What in the world do you think you are doing?" Melanie hissed. Her voice was a venomous whisper, completely hidden behind a wide, photogenic smile she plastered on for the benefit of the staring guests. "You are not on the guest list, Caroline. You need to turn around and walk right back out those doors before I call the local police and have you arrested for criminal trespassing." I did not break my stride. I simply pivoted my shoulders smoothly, stepping around her blocking maneuver with the practiced grace of a seasoned socialite. "Do not make a scene, Melanie," I replied evenly, keeping my own smile dazzling and bright. "We have far too many important investors watching us right now. You would not want to ruin your perfect philanthropic image by throwing a tantrum in the middle of your own gala, would you?" I continued gliding forward, forcing Melanie to scramble to keep up with me. She grabbed my elbow, her manicured nails digging sharply into my skin. "I am not playing games with you," she whispered fiercely, her smile straining at the edges. "Jamal has security on standby. You are a mentally unstable woman who abandoned her child and broke into a private country club. If you do not leave this instant, they will drag you out in handcuffs." I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. I then turned my attention to a small group of older, very wealthy-looking men standing just a few feet away. I recognized them immediately. They were the primary venture capitalists backing the massive new eco-resort. "Gentlemen," I said clearly, my voice carrying just enough to draw them into our conversation. "I am so glad to finally meet the visionaries behind this incredible project." The men turned toward us, their eyes lighting up with polite interest. Melanie instantly froze. She could not drag me away now without causing a massive public spectacle in front of the exact people funding her lavish lifestyle. I extended my hand to the tallest man in the group. "I am Caroline, her younger sister. She has told me so much about your generous contributions to her charitable foundation. It is truly inspiring to see such immense capital being funneled directly into this development." The man smiled warmly and shook my hand. "It is a pleasure, Caroline. Your sister and Jamal have put together a remarkable proposal. We are very confident in the financial structure." I turned to look at Melanie. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. The blood had completely drained from her face. She knew exactly what I was doing. I was trapping her in a social cage made of her own lies. "Oh, the financial structure is certainly unique," I said, offering the investors a knowing, sophisticated smile. "Jamal has utilized some very creative holding strategies in Delaware to secure the initial funding. I am actually a forensic accountant by trade, so I find his methods absolutely fascinating." Melanie let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, stepping quickly between me and the investors. "My sister is always so interested in the boring details," Melanie interrupted loudly. "We are just so thrilled she could make it tonight. Excuse us for just one moment, gentlemen. Family business." She grabbed my arm again, this time with desperate force, and tried to pull me toward a secluded alcove near the kitchen doors. Her fake smile was twitching uncontrollably. "Shut your mouth," she growled under her breath. "I do not know how you bought that dress, or how you got past the front gate, but if you say one more word to my investors, I will personally destroy you." Before I could deliver my response, A heavy, aggressive hand clamped down hard on my bare shoulder. I was violently spun around, the sudden force nearly knocking me off balance in high heels. Trent stood towering over me, his face red with anger and whiskey. "You need to get out of here right now," he snarled. I reached out with my free hand and smoothly lifted a full crystal flute of vintage champagne off a silver tray carried by a frozen, terrified waiter standing just inches away. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I simply leveled my cold gaze with my ex-husband and forcefully threw the entire glass of icy champagne directly into his face. The golden liquid splashed violently against his skin, soaking his tailored charcoal suit and dripping down his perfectly styled hair. Trent gasped loudly, instantly releasing my shoulder as he stumbled backward in pure shock. He wiped his stinging eyes, sputtering violent curses. The crowd of wealthy investors surrounding us let out a collective horrified gasp. Several high society women stepped back rapidly, shielding their expensive silk gowns from the sudden splash zone. "Are you completely insane?" Trent roared, his face turning a deep, furious shade of purple. "Security, get the guards over here right now," Melanie shrieked, dropping her own fake philanthropic composure completely. "Grab her," she yelled, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. "Someone grab her before she ruins the whole night." From the far corners of the massive ballroom, 4 heavily built country club security guards dressed in matching black suits started sprinting through the crowd. They pushed past the bewildered socialites, closing in on my position with aggressive, threatening speed. Jamal was shouting frantic orders from the stage, his booming voice cutting through the rising panic in the room. This was exactly the chaotic distraction I needed. The entire room was focused entirely on Trent wiping champagne from his eyes and the guards rushing the center of the dance floor. Nobody was watching the technical setup. I spun around, my designer heels gripping the polished hardwood floor, and sprinted in the opposite direction. I bypassed the panicked guests and headed straight for the raised audio-visual booth situated on the left side of the main stage. The DJ and the technical director were standing up, completely distracted by the commotion unfolding with Trent. "Hey, you cannot be back here!" the technical director shouted angrily as I bypassed the velvet rope and stepped into the cramped, dark booth. I ignored him entirely. I slammed my black clutch purse onto the mixing console and snapped it open. My fingers immediately found the encrypted silver flash drive I had prepared earlier at the freezing diner. The tech director reached out to grab my arm, but I forcefully shoved his hand away, moving with the practiced speed of someone who knew exactly how corporate presentation hardware was wired. I located the master visual input hub connected directly to the towering LED screens behind the main podium. Without a single second of hesitation, I shoved the flash drive into the primary USB port. My fingers flew rapidly across the control board, bypassing the standard country club operating system and executing a forced override command I had programmed myself. "What are you doing to my board?" the tech director yelled frantically, trying to push me out of the way. "Stop touching the controls!" I stepped back, smoothing down the front of my black dress with absolute terrifying calm. "I am just fixing the presentation," I replied coldly. The security guards finally reached the booth, grabbing my bare arms and pulling me roughly away from the console. Trent was right behind them, his suit dripping wet, his face twisted in absolute fury. "You are going to jail for this, Caroline," he spat, breathing heavily. "You are a psychotic loser, and you are done." I did not fight the heavy grip of the guards. I simply stood tall and tilted my head toward the main stage. "I really think you should look at the screens, Trent," I said smoothly. Trent frowned and turned his head. The entire ballroom had suddenly gone completely silent. The soft murmurs and panicked whispers died instantly. Behind Jamal, the massive LED displays flickered violently. The elegant logo of their $50 million eco-resort vanished completely. In its place, projected 50 feet high for every billionaire investor to see, were the offshore casino debt statements of Trent. The undeniable absolute proof was displayed in massive, bold font. Trent was hiding a massive $1.2 million gambling debt, and he was now officially bankrupt. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked gasps and frantic whispering. The elite attendees of the Winter Gala pointed their crystal champagne flutes at the towering digital screens. The glaring red numbers of Trent's massive offshore casino debt illuminated the horrified faces of the wealthy investors. $1.2 million. It was a financial death sentence broadcasted in high definition. Trent stared up at the screen, his jaw hanging open in pure terror. The champagne I had thrown in his face dripped pathetically from his chin. He scrambled backward, looking wildly around the room as the reality of his public exposure set in. He held up his hands, forcing a loud, frantic laugh that echoed terribly across the dance floor. "This is a joke," Trent shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "It is a fake document. She hacked the system to project a Photoshop file. Do not look at that. I am completely solvent. I just closed a massive consulting deal last week. She is just a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin my reputation because I won custody of our son." I reached over the mixing console and grabbed the sleek wireless microphone the technical director had dropped in his panic. I flipped the switch. The sound system emitted a sharp screech before my voice cut through the massive ballroom, amplifying my cold, calculated tone over the murmurs of the crowd. "It is not Photoshop, Trent," I said clearly, my voice ringing out from every premium speaker in the room. "I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in forged documents. I deal in metadata and verified digital ledgers." I tapped a key on the laptop I had plugged into the console. The screen behind Jamal shifted, displaying a secondary document. It was a scanned copy of a notarized property deed. "Let us look at the math." I continued pacing slowly behind the DJ booth, keeping my eyes locked on Trent. "You owe the Macau syndicate $1.2 million. You missed your last 3 minimum payments. Your credit score is completely destroyed and your bank accounts are currently overdrawn by $40,000. But the most interesting part is how you tried to stop the bleeding." Trent turned pale white. He shook his head violently, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. "Last Tuesday I said, projecting my voice so every billionaire in the room could hear the absolute truth. You secretly took out a second mortgage on your elderly parents' home in New Jersey to secure a high-interest loan. You used their retirement property as collateral to pay off a fraction of your gambling debts without telling them. If you do not make the $100,000 balloon payment by the 1st of next month, the bank will foreclose. You did not just bankrupt yourself, Trent. You made your own parents homeless to cover your casino losses." The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. The wealthy investors standing near Trent physically took a step away from him, treating him like he carried a highly contagious disease. In high society, wealth is respected, but stealing from your own elderly parents to feed a gambling addiction is an unforgivable social crime. Trent collapsed to his knees right there on the polished hardwood floor. The arrogant, pristine man who had whispered vile threats into my ear earlier was completely gone. He buried his face in his hands, quietly sobbing as his entire world disintegrated in front of the most powerful people in New York. He was financially ruined, socially exiled, and utterly destroyed. I watched him break with zero sympathy. But I knew Trent was just the opening act. The real target was still standing on the stage. Jamal realized his $50 million eco-resort announcement was rapidly spiraling into a catastrophic public relations nightmare. His investors were whispering about fraud and bankruptcy. He had to regain control of the narrative immediately. He straightened his velvet tuxedo jacket, gripped the edges of the crystal podium, and leaned into his own microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jamal boomed, projecting an aura of deep, sorrowful authority, "please remain calm. What you are witnessing right now is a tragedy, but it is a medical tragedy." He pointed directly at me, his eyes narrowing with venomous calculation. He was about to play his final desperate card. "My sister-in-law is suffering from severe documented postpartum psychosis," Jamal announced to the horrified crowd. "She is experiencing extreme paranoid delusions. She broke in here tonight because she is deeply unwell. These documents are the frantic fabrications of a sick mind. Security, please remove her carefully before she hurts herself or anyone else. We must ensure this disturbed woman finally receives the psychiatric help she so desperately needs." Jamal did not stop there. He gripped the podium tighter, his knuckles turning white, and launched into a full-scale legal assault. "You are looking at a massive defamation lawsuit, Caroline," he boomed, ensuring his voice overpowered the whispers of the crowd. "I will personally see to it that you are sued into absolute oblivion for projecting these forged documents. You have broken into a private event, assaulted a guest, and slandered my family. You are a severely ill woman, and this pathetic display ends right now." I stood my ground in the audio-visual booth, holding the microphone steady. I looked right past Jamal and locked eyes with my sister. Melanie was standing near the edge of the stage, her hands clasped over her chest, trying her absolute hardest to look like the terrified innocent victim of my supposed mental breakdown. "Defamation requires the statements to be false, Jamal," I replied, my voice echoing coldly across the silent ballroom. "But since you are so concerned about the integrity of your family, let us talk about your beautiful philanthropic wife." Melanie flinched, as if I had physically struck her. "Leave me out of your psychotic delusions," she yelled, her voice trembling. I did not argue with her. I just pressed the spacebar on my laptop. The massive LED screens behind Jamal flickered again. Trent Casino debt vanished instantly, replaced by crystal-clear high-definition security footage. The setting was unmistakable to anyone in that room. It was the VIP private viewing suite of the Hermes boutique on Madison Avenue. The timestamp in the corner read October 14th, exactly 3 months after I was kicked out of the penthouse. The billionaire investors stared up at the screen in absolute silence. They watched the pristine, charitable Melanie sipping sparkling water, while a sales associate presented her with an incredibly rare crocodile Birkin bag. "Melanie runs the family charity," I narrated smoothly over the video playing on the screen. "A charity that many of you in this room generously donated to tonight. She claims to take no salary, dedicating her life to helping underprivileged families." On the screen, Melanie smiled brightly and handed the sales associate a heavy black titanium credit card. I had programmed the presentation to zoom in on the transaction terminal. I displayed the official bank statement right next to the video feed. "That is the primary corporate card for the charitable foundation," I stated loudly. "And that is a $50,000 transaction for a handbag, classified in the tax filings as a humanitarian outreach expense." The crowd erupted again, this time with genuine outrage. Stealing from a charity was the ultimate sin in high society circles. Melanie went completely pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "It was for a silent auction," Melanie finally screamed, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "It was a fundraising item. You are taking this out of context." "Oh, I am sure the children in need really appreciated the crocodile leather," I replied mockingly. "But if you want context, let us look at your humanitarian mission to Uganda last month." I hit the spacebar one more time. The Hermes boutique vanished. The screen was immediately filled with crisp footage from a hidden security camera mounted outside a secluded ultra-luxury ski chalet in Aspen, Colorado. The snowy landscape was beautiful, but it was the two people stumbling up the front steps that captured the attention of the entire ballroom. It was Melanie. She was wearing designer ski gear and laughing uncontrollably. Wrapped around her waist, kissing her neck with intense passion, was a heavily muscled man who was definitely not her husband. "This is your personal fitness trainer," I announced calmly over the microphone. "While you told your husband and our mother that you were building water wells in East Africa, you were actually spending 2 weeks in Aspen. And you paid for the $70,000 chalet rental using the exact same charity credit card." The video showed Melanie pulling the trainer through the front door of the chalet, kicking it shut behind them. It was undeniable. It was filthy. It was the absolute destruction of her pristine golden child image. Jamal turned around to look at the screen, his jaw rigid. The smug, untouchable wealth manager suddenly realized he was married to a woman who was embezzling from her own donors to fund her secret affairs. But the most satisfying reaction came from the front row. Diana sat rigidly in her seat watching the destruction of her perfect narrative. Melanie was her pride, her joy, her ultimate achievement. As the reality of the Aspen footage washed over her, my mother slowly stood up. Her hands were shaking violently. The heavy crystal champagne glass slipped directly through her fingers. The glass hit the polished hardwood floor and shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The sharp crashing sound echoed through the silent ballroom, but nobody even blinked. Every eye was locked on my mother as she stared at the glowing LED screen. Melanie realized her entire world was collapsing. The flawless, philanthropic mask she had worn for her entire life melted away, revealing a terrified, furious woman. She turned her back on the wealthy investors and sprinted toward the audiovisual booth. "Turn it off!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. Her voice cracked, turning into a desperate, unhinged screech. "Cut the feed right now! Unplug the screens! Do you hear me? Turn it off!" The technical director raised his hands and backed away from the console, entirely unwilling to get involved in a billionaire family war. I stood my ground near the mixing board, keeping my hand resting casually over the flash drive. "I am just providing transparency to your generous donors. Melanie," I said smoothly. "You always said honesty was the core value of your foundation." Melanie lunged at me, but a sudden sharp voice cut through the air. "Melanie." It was Diana. My mother had walked right up to the edge of the stage. Her posture was completely rigid, but her face was drained of all color. She looked 20 years older than she had just 10 minutes ago. Melanie froze. She slowly turned around to face our mother. "Mom, I can explain," Melanie stammered, her eyes darting wildly around the room. "It is a deep fake. Caroline hired someone to alter the security footage because she is insanely jealous of me. She wants to ruin the family." Diana shook her head slowly. "Do not lie to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and rising fury. "I know your schedule. I know you said you were at a rural clinic in Uganda last month, but your passport never left the country. I saw the bank alerts for the charity card, but you told me it was a system error. You used my foundation, my legacy, to fund your disgusting affairs." The billionaire investors watched the epic confrontation in absolute stunned silence. Melanie looked at the crowd, then at the undeniable video evidence still looping on the massive screen behind her. The pressure was too much. Her meticulously constructed facade finally shattered completely. She snapped. "Oh, stop being so incredibly dramatic!" "Mom," Melanie yelled, throwing her hands up in the air. Her tone was vicious, dripping with absolute contempt. "Do you really think I want to spend my life pretending to care about building water wells in third-world countries? I only run your stupid charity because you need a tax write-off and someone to make you look like a saint to your rich friends. I did exactly what you wanted. I played the perfect golden daughter so you could parade me around the Hamptons." Diana gasped, clutching a hand to her chest, as if she had been physically stabbed. Melanie stepped closer to the edge of the stage, pointing a furious manicured finger down at the woman who had given her everything. "I earned that Aspen trip," Melanie snarled, her voice echoing through the microphone Jamal had dropped on the podium. "I earned every single dollar I spent because I have to deal with your exhausting demands every single day. You are an arrogant, controlling nightmare, Mom. You drove Dad away. You drove Caroline away. I am the only one who stayed, and I only stayed because you pay my bills. Do not stand there acting like a victim. You bought my loyalty and I spent the money. That is how this family works." The entire country club gasped in unison. Diana stumbled backward, her eyes wide with horror. The illusion of her perfect family was completely obliterated. Melanie had publicly admitted to massive financial fraud while destroying my mother in front of every investor in New York. Before the total weight of the destruction could fully settle over the room, Jamal moved. He recovered from the shock of his wife's infidelity and realized his $50 million project was slipping through his fingers. He stormed across the stage, shoving Melanie roughly out of his way. He snatched the microphone off the podium. His face was a mask of cold, ruthless legal calculation. "That is enough," Jamal boomed, his deep voice commanding the room. He pointed directly at me, his eyes narrowing with a predatory glare. You want to air dirty laundry, Caroline? Fine. But this gala is about business, and the $5 million funding this new real estate project is securely locked away inside a Delaware holding company that you will absolutely never be able to touch. Jamal adjusted his velvet lapels, projecting an aura of absolute invincibility. He looked at the murmuring crowd of billionaires and let out a deep, condescending laugh. Let us separate the emotional hysterics from the financial reality, Jamal declared, his voice echoing with practiced corporate authority. My wife clearly has her own personal issues to work through, and we will handle that privately. But do not let this pathetic family drama distract you from the actual business at hand. The $50 million eco-resort we are building is entirely secure. The foundational capital, the $5 million that my deeply disturbed sister-in-law claims is hers, is legally and permanently integrated into a corporate entity known as Apex Holdings LLC. He paced across the stage, completely ignoring Melanie, who was now sobbing quietly near the heavy velvet curtains. Jamal was in his element. He was a shark smelling blood in the water, trying to protect his investors by projecting absolute legal dominance. Apex Holdings is a Delaware-based corporation. Jamal continued, speaking directly to the venture capitalists I had just spoken with. And for those of you who actually understand high-level wealth management, you know exactly what that means. Delaware has the most ironclad corporate privacy laws in the entire country. The assets within that holding company are completely shielded from civil litigation, frivolous lawsuits, and desperate family members looking for a quick payout. Every single transfer was authorized, documented, and fully notarized. It is mathematically and legally untouchable. He turned his sharp, predatory gaze back to me, standing by the audio-visual booth. He pointed his microphone in my direction, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. You see, Caroline? This is the fundamental difference between you and me. Jamal mocked, his voice dripping with pure arrogance. You are a broke, unemployed accountant who balances spreadsheets for a living. You spent a few years looking at corporate receipts and you suddenly think you understand how true global wealth is structured. You do not. You are standing here in a dress you probably rented, making a massive fool of yourself because you are angry that your trust fund was rightfully managed to prevent you from squandering it. You can hack a display screen. You can play embarrassing videos. You can even throw a temper tantrum in front of the most powerful people in New York. But you cannot touch the money. You do not have the legal authority, the financial leverage, or the intellectual capacity to pierce the corporate veil of Apex Holdings. He let out another booming laugh, expecting the wealthy crowd to join him. But the investors remained completely silent. They were not looking at him. They were looking at me. I did not argue with him. I did not shout back or defend my career. I simply picked up a sleek leather folder I had left resting on the mixing console, bypassed the stunned technical director, and started walking toward the stage. My designer heels clicked rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. The crowd parted for me once again, giving me a wide, respectful berth. I reached the wooden steps leading up to the main stage and began my steady ascent. Security. Jamal barked into the microphone, his composed facade cracking just a fraction as he saw me approaching. Stop her right now. Do not let her on this stage. But the security guards were frozen. They had just watched a billionaire family publicly self-destruct, and they were utterly terrified of touching a woman who carried herself with such lethal confidence. They stayed exactly where they were. I stepped onto the stage, the bright spotlights washing over my black gown. I walked directly past my mother, who was still staring blankly at the shattered crystal on the floor. I walked past Trent, who was still kneeling in his own misery. I stopped exactly 2 feet in front of Jamal. He towered over me, gripping the microphone like a weapon, his chest heaving with adrenaline and sudden anger. He expected me to scream. He expected me to throw a punch or hurl another glass of expensive champagne right into his smug face. He was eagerly bracing for an emotional outburst that he could use to finally prove to the crowd that I was completely unhinged and dangerous. Instead, I looked up at his face and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the cold, calculating smile of a predator that had just successfully trapped its prey in a corner with absolutely no way out. I did not say a single word. I simply reached out and pressed a thick, heavy red folder directly against his chest. The stark red cardboard was stamped with the unmistakable golden seal of the United States federal government. Jamal stared down at the red federal dossier pressed against his chest. His arrogant smirk faltered for the first time all evening. He hesitated, his eyes darting from the golden seal of the government to my unwavering gaze. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom amplified the subtle rustle of the thick paper as he finally reached up and took the folder from my hands. He opened it slowly, as if he suspected a live explosive was hidden inside. In a way, there was. I stepped back, allowing the harsh stage lights to illuminate his face as his eyes scanned the top document. It was a certified unredacted corporate formation registry from the state of Delaware. "You see, Jamal, you were right about one thing," I said, projecting my voice clearly without needing a microphone. My tone was conversational, yet it carried a lethal edge that held every billionaire in the room completely captivated. The corporate privacy laws in Delaware are indeed the strongest in the nation. That is exactly why high-end wealth managers like you love to use them. When you need to hide illicit funds quickly, you do not start a brand new company. A new company looks incredibly suspicious to federal auditors. Instead, you go to a premium corporate broker, and you buy an aged shell corporation. An entity that has been sitting dormant for years, building a completely clean, untraceable history. Jamal flipped to the second page, his hands beginning to tremble violently. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. His breathing turned shallow and erratic. The wealthy investors leaning in from the front row could clearly see the sheer panic seizing his massive frame. "You paid a premium broker $50,000 to acquire Apex Holdings, LLC. I continued pacing slowly across the expansive wooden stage. "You bought it because it was formed exactly 5 years ago. You bought it because it had a flawless record, zero liabilities, and absolute anonymity. You thought you were purchasing the perfect digital vault to launder the $5 million you stole from my trust. You transferred the funds, fractured them across state lines, and pumped them back into this eco-resort, completely confident that the Delaware firewall would protect your identity forever." I stopped pacing and turned to face the crowd of elite venture capitalists. They were hanging on to my every single word, entirely hypnotized by the forensic destruction of the man who had just begged them for $50 million. "But there is a major flaw in the aged shell company market," I announced, letting my voice drop to a chilling, authoritative register. "The brokers who sell those dormant corporations do not actually verify who originally created them. They just care that the paperwork is perfectly clean." Jamal looked up from the dossier. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it almost looked like physical agony. He opened his mouth to speak, to launch another legal threat, or perhaps to simply beg, but his throat was completely dry. No sound came out at all. I turned my attention back to my brother-in-law, delivering the killing blow with absolute surgical precision. 5 years ago, I was working as a senior investigator for a federal task force tracking international embezzlement syndicates. My job was to figure out exactly how men like you hid their stolen money. So I did not just study the system, I actively baited it. I personally registered 12 different anonymous shell corporations in the great state of Delaware. I paid the annual franchise fees out of my own pocket. I kept the ledgers completely spotless, and then I released them into the premium brokerage market for predators to find. The ballroom was so quiet you could hear the crystal chandeliers softly clinking above us. "In the cybersecurity world, it is called a honeypot," I explained smoothly, watching the absolute devastation wash over Jamal. "It is a decoy system intentionally designed to look incredibly attractive to criminals. It looks like a highly secure vault, but it is actually rigged with silent alarms and tracking software. Apex Holdings was my most successful honeypot. I built it, I seeded it. I held the master cryptographic keys to the internal ledgers since the very day it was incorporated. Jamal dropped the red folder. The heavy federal document spilled across the stage, scattering at his expensive leather shoes. "You did not buy a secure shell company, Jamal," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "You bought a highly monitored financial tracker entirely controlled by me. Every single time you wired my stolen trust money directly into that account, you were not hiding it. You were sending me a direct time-stamped digital notification of your exact crimes." Jamal took a staggering step backward. Thick beads of sweat broke out across his forehead, shining under the harsh glare of the stage lights. His pristine velvet tuxedo suddenly looked heavy and suffocating. He leaned in close to me, his chest heaving, and dropped his voice to a frantic, venomous whisper. "You are bluffing," he hissed, his eyes darting toward the crowd and then back to my face. "You cannot prove any of this in a court of law. I am a licensed attorney. I have a team of corporate litigators who will bury you in civil motions until you are bankrupt. If you do not walk off this stage right now, I will sue you for everything you have ever owned. I will make sure you never see your son again. Do you hear me? I will destroy you." I did not back away. I did not let his desperate intimidation tactics push me into a corner. Instead, I stood my ground and raised my voice, ensuring that every single word I spoke echoed clearly across the grand ballroom. "Why are you whispering, Jamal?" I asked loudly, watching his eyes widen in pure terror. "We are standing in front of your most valuable investors. We are standing in front of my mother. If your financial strategies are so brilliant and legally sound, you should be proud to discuss them at full volume. Let us educate the room about exactly how your wealth management firm operates behind closed doors." Jamal frantically shook his head, holding up his hands in a pathetic attempt to quiet me down. "Please," he mouthed silently, all his previous arrogance completely evaporated. I ignored him. I turned my attention back to the audience of billionaires and high society elites. If my brother-in-law had simply kept the stolen money inside the state of New York, he might have stood a fighting chance, I explained, pacing slowly across the wooden stage. Embezzlement from a family trust is a serious offense, but it is fundamentally a state-level crime. A slick lawyer with the right connections and enough money could drag a state civil case out for decades. They could claim it was a misunderstanding or hide behind forged medical documents, claiming I was mentally unfit to manage my own finances. That was his original plan. He thought he could use local courts to trap me in endless litigation. But Jamal is a man driven by immense greed and an overwhelming need to outsmart the system. I continued, my voice sharp and cutting. He did not just want to steal the money. He wanted to wash it clean so he could build this massive luxury resort without leaving a single fingerprint. And that is where his massive ego became his ultimate downfall. You see the moment he clicked a button in his Manhattan office and transferred those funds into the Apex Holdings account, the money physically left New York jurisdiction. It crossed the border. It entered the digital banking networks of the state of Delaware. I slowly walked back over to the center of the stage where Jamal was standing frozen. He looked exactly like a guilty man standing directly on the trapdoor of the gallows, just waiting for the lever to be pulled. The silence in the Hamptons Country Club was absolute. Even Trent had stopped sobbing to listen. My mother was gripping the edge of her table, her knuckles stark white, finally realizing the horrific magnitude of the monster she had welcomed into our family. "You use digital banking networks and telecommunications infrastructure to move stolen funds across state borders," I told Jamal directly, making sure he felt the full weight of the trap closing around him. "You did it on the first of every single month for an entire year. You established a documented, undeniable pattern of criminal behavior. And because you used a shell company that I personally seeded with federal tracking software, the authorities have a pristine, unbroken chain of evidence for every single transaction you authorized. They have the routing numbers. They have the IP addresses pinging directly from your private office server. They have the fraudulent signatures you attached to the wire transfers." Jamal fell to his knees, his expensive custom-tailored suit crumpling awkwardly against the polished hardwood floor. He grabbed the edge of the crystal podium with both hands, frantically trying to hold himself upright as his entire world completely collapsed. I looked straight down at him, feeling absolutely no pity for the corrupt man who had tried to take my son away from me. I leaned down slightly, delivering the final, devastating reality check to the man who thought he was a financial god. You didn't just steal from a trust, Jamal. You committed federal wire fraud. The heavy words hung in the air like a physical weight, crushing the last remnants of arrogance out of the room. Trent suddenly shot up to his feet from the floor near the front tables. The sheer terror of federal prison completely overrode whatever shred of dignity he had left. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at Melanie. He simply spun around and sprinted toward the massive carved oak double doors at the back of the ballroom. His expensive shoes slipped wildly on the hardwood, but he caught his balance and threw his body weight against the brass handles. The doors did not budge. Trent let out a panicked gasp, shoving his shoulders against the unyielding oak doors. He grabbed the handles and rattled them violently, his face pressed against the crack between the doors. "Open it!" he screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. "Somebody open the door right now! I need to leave! I have nothing to do with this!" He banged his fists against the wood, a pathetic display of cowardice. The security guards standing near the exits did not move to help him. They had received their orders directly from the venue manager, and the venue manager had received his orders directly from the federal agents, waiting just out of sight. I turned my gaze away from Trent and looked down at Jamal. "You see, the beautiful thing about federal law is how it classifies teamwork," I said, making sure my voice carried effortlessly across the silent room. Jamal slowly pushed himself up from the floor, his breathing ragged. He looked like a cornered animal desperately searching for a loophole that simply did not exist. "I am a licensed attorney," Jamal stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I was acting as legal counsel. I have attorney-client privilege. I was merely advising Trent and your mother on asset protection strategies." I laughed softly, a cold and hollow sound. "Attorney-client privilege does not cover active participation in a criminal enterprise, Jamal. And that is exactly what the three of you built." I gestured toward Melanie, who was cowering near the velvet stage curtains. Trent filed the fraudulent custody papers to justify freezing my accounts. Melanie isolated our mother and diverted her attention by embezzling from her own charity. And you, the brilliant wealth manager, executed the wire transfers across state lines to launder the stolen money into this real estate project. The three of you colluded perfectly. You moved the funds together. You forged the documents together. You planned my destruction together. The wealthy investors exchanged horrified glances, slowly stepping away from the stage. They were billionaires, and they understood exactly where I was going with this legal breakdown. When three individuals conspire to commit wire fraud across state lines on a monthly basis, it is no longer simple theft, I announced, delivering the legal hammer blow. You are no longer just greedy family members. Under federal law, you are officially classified as a criminal syndicate. Jamal closed his eyes, a look of profound physical sickness washing over his face. He knew exactly what acronym was coming next. Because you used the stolen funds to invest in a legitimate business enterprise, this $50 million eco-resort, you triggered the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act 1, stated, my voice echoing like a judge reading a final sentence. The Federal RICO Act. It was designed to take down the mafia, but it works flawlessly on corrupt wealth managers and greedy spouses. It means the federal government does not just arrest you. It means they immediately seize every single asset tied to the criminal enterprise. Your bank accounts are already frozen. Your luxury cars, your Hamptons estate, and every dollar invested in this resort are currently being seized by the United States Treasury. You face 20 years in a federal penitentiary, and you will serve every single day of it completely bankrupt. Melanie let out a piercing, hysterical scream, finally understanding that her entire life of luxury was completely over. She dropped to her knees, clutching her diamond necklace, as if she could save it from the government. Diana sat perfectly still in the front row, staring blankly at the destruction of her golden child and her pristine family legacy. Jamal just stood there completely hollowed out, staring at the floor as his entire empire dissolved into dust. Suddenly, the ballroom was illuminated by flashing red and blue lights. The brilliant strobes pierced through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows lining the far wall of the country club. The billionaire investors gasped, turning to look out at the snowy driveway. A massive fleet of black tactical SUVs forcefully breached the front gates, their tires screeching against the icy pavement as they surrounded the building. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom were violently kicked open. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical gear and windbreakers, boldly stamped with the letters FBI and IRS criminal investigation, poured into the room. The sudden influx of armed authority instantly shattered the sophisticated atmosphere of the Winter Gala. The string quartet had long since fled the stage, and now the wealthiest billionaires in New York were shrinking back against the silk-draped walls, desperate to distance themselves from the epic criminal downfall unfolding in front of them. Special Agent Keller, a tall, imposing man with graying hair and an absolutely no-nonsense demeanor, led the vanguard. He held a thick stack of federal warrants in his right hand. He marched directly down the center aisle, his heavy boots thudding against the polished hardwood floor. "Secure all exits," Keller barked over his shoulder to his team. "Nobody leaves this building until we verify identities and secure the electronic devices of the primary suspects." Jamal watched the federal agents approach the stage, his eyes wide with absolute panic. The reality of a 20-year prison sentence finally broke through his impenetrable ego. The instinct for self-preservation completely overrode his supposed family values and his loyalty to his wife. He scrambled up from his knees, brushing the dust off his custom velvet tuxedo jacket in a frantic attempt to regain his professional composure. He stepped away from Melanie, who was still kneeling and sobbing near the heavy stage curtains, and rushed to the edge of the stage to meet Special Agent Keller. "Agent Keller, there has been a massive misunderstanding here," Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I am a licensed attorney and a registered wealth manager. I demand to speak with my legal representation immediately. You are making a catastrophic mistake." Keller stopped at the bottom of the wooden steps, looking up at Jamal with absolute disgust. "Jamal Harrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud, money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act," Keller stated, his voice booming across the silent room. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "I had nothing to do with the origin of those funds," Jamal screamed, physically backing away from the federal agent. He threw his arm out, pointing a shaking finger directly at Trent and Melanie. "It was them. They are the ones who orchestrated the theft." Trent forged the wire authorizations to drain the family trust. Melanie diverted the money through her charity accounts. I was merely acting as their legal counsel and fiduciary advisor. They lied to me. They provided me with fraudulent documentation, and I executed the transfers in good faith. I am completely innocent. I am a victim of their deception. The entire ballroom gasped at the sheer ruthlessness of his betrayal. Melanie stopped crying and stared at her husband in absolute horrifying shock. "You are blaming me," she shrieked, her voice echoing wildly across the stage. "You set up the Delaware company, Jamal. You told us exactly how to route the money. You said we would never get caught." Trent, who was still pinned near the locked exit doors by two federal agents, started screaming curses at Jamal, entirely abandoning his own innocent victim act. Jamal ignored his wife and his co-conspirator, keeping his frantic eyes locked on Special Agent Keller. "I have attorney-client privilege," Jamal insisted, sweating profusely. "I can provide full cooperation and turn over all their private communications in exchange for full federal immunity. I was just the lawyer doing my job. You cannot prove I had any criminal intent." He thought he had found his loophole. He thought his plausible deniability would save him from federal prison while his wife and brother-in-law took the entire fall. He turned to look at me, a tiny spark of desperate triumph flickering in his eyes. I walked slowly to the edge of the audio-visual booth, holding my burner phone in my hand. "You are right, Jamal," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the microphone system. Proving criminal intent in a federal court can be incredibly difficult when a slick wealth manager claims he was simply following his client's orders. But unfortunately for you, I do not just rely on digital paper trails. I plugged a standard auxiliary cable directly into the main mixing console and connected it to my phone. I pressed play. The massive premium speakers of the country club roared to life. It was not a video this time. It was the crystal-clear, high-definition audio recording I secretly captured 2 weeks ago in my mother penthouse. The recording started exactly at the moment Jamal began bragging. His arrogant, booming voice filled the ballroom. The recording echoed through the massive ballroom. Jamal's own voice swaggered through the premium speakers, explicitly detailing his master plan. I set up the Delaware LLC. The recorded voice of Jamal laughed. Trent was too stupid to forge the wire authorizations, so I did it myself. Melanie kept your mother distracted while I funneled the money directly into the resort foundation. It is foolproof. We own the money, we own her mother, and Caroline is completely out of the picture. The audio clicked off. The crushing reality of the confession hung over the room. Special Agent Keller unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Jamal Harrison Keller repeated his voice devoid of any sympathy. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law. 2 federal agents grabbed Jamal by the shoulders. They spun the arrogant wealth manager around, shoving him against the crystal podium. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs snapping shut echoed loudly across the stage. Jamal did not resist. His entire body went limp, his custom velvet tuxedo instantly looking like a cheap costume. Melanie shrieked as 2 IRS agents pulled her arms behind her back. She thrashed and kicked, screaming for our mother to do something, but Diana remained frozen in her seat. The golden child was shackled like a common criminal, her diamond necklace tangling as the cuffs locked her wrists. Down on the main floor, Trent frantically tried to wrestle his way out of the grip of 2 FBI agents. They easily overpowered him, slamming him against the hardwood floor. As they hauled him to his feet, Trent locked eyes with me. The realization that he was heading to a federal penitentiary finally shattered his delusions. "Caroline, wait!" Trent screamed as the agents dragged him toward the exit. "Please, do not do this. Tell them to stop. We can work this out. I am sorry." I walked slowly to the edge of the stage, looking down at the pathetic man I had once thought I loved. The billionaire investors watched the exchange in stunned silence, completely captivated by the brutal execution of justice. "Please," Caroline Trent begged, fresh tears streaming down his face. "Think of Leo. Think of our baby. A boy needs his father. You cannot let your son grow up with his dad in a federal prison. Have mercy for the sake of our child." I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clinical satisfaction. "You do not get to use my son as a human shield, Trent," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. "And you do not get to call yourself his father." Trent choked on a sob, pulling against the federal agents. "I am his dad, Caroline. You cannot change that." "Actually, Trent, you already changed that yourself," I said smoothly. "Do you remember those emergency custody papers you shoved in my mother's face 2 weeks ago? The ones Jamal drafted so you could legally kidnap Leo and force me into a psychiatric ward." Trent nodded frantically, his eyes wide with confusion. "You were in such a massive rush to get your hands on my money and lock me away that you did not even bother to read the legal documents Jamal handed you," I explained, delivering the final devastating blow. Jamal did not want the liability of a child tied to the stolen funds. He buried a full, irrevocable relinquishment of parental rights in the back pages of that custody petition. When you signed those papers in front of the family court judge, you legally surrendered all your parental rights to the state to avoid future child support obligations. You are not Leo's father anymore, Trent. You are just a bankrupt felon. Trent let out a visceral, agonizing scream as the reality of his own sheer stupidity crushed him. The federal agents did not hesitate. They dragged him violently backward, hauling him through the heavy oak doors and out into the freezing winter night. I turned my attention back to the stage. Special Agent Keller was forcefully guiding Jamal down the wooden steps. The slick, untouchable wealth manager who had built an empire on lies and manipulation was completely broken. His reputation as a legal genius was permanently destroyed. His license to practice law would be revoked by morning. His $50 million resort and all his hidden assets were already seized. The crowd of New York elites parted in absolute silence, refusing to make eye contact with the disgraced attorney. Jamal kept his head bowed, humiliated and destroyed, as he was marched directly out of the Hamptons Country Club to face the rest of his life behind bars. The three villains were finally gone, but the final confrontation was truly just beginning. "Mom, you have to stop them!" Melanie shrieked, her voice echoing violently across the emptying ballroom. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined, dark mascara streaming down her cheeks as absolute panic seized her. "Call your legal team right now. Call Richard. Tell him to get down here and fix this. You cannot let them take me to a federal prison. I am your daughter." Diana remained seated in the front row. She looked like a marble statue, completely frozen in a state of profound earth-shattering shock. The woman who had ruthlessly controlled our family for decades, who had always prioritized her public image above everything else, was sitting in the epicenter of the greatest social scandal in New York history. She did not reach for her phone. She did not summon her corporate lawyers. She just stared blankly at the floor, surrounded by the shattered glass of her dropped champagne flute. "Mom, look at me." Melanie screamed, her voice cracking with desperate, unhinged entitlement. The IRS agents forcefully pulled her forward, dragging her toward the wooden steps of the stage. "You have billions of dollars. You can pay their fines. You can post my bail. Tell these federal agents that it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I was just following Jamal's financial advice. You promised to always protect me." Slowly, Diana lifted her head. She looked at her golden child, the daughter she had placed on an impossible pedestal for 30 years. The daughter who had just publicly admitted to using the family charity as a personal slush fund to finance her secret affairs in Aspen. "I have spent my entire life giving you everything you ever wanted," Diana whispered. Her voice was incredibly quiet, yet it carried a weight of crushing devastation that silenced the entire room. "I gave you my trust. I gave you control of my legacy. And you stole from me. You stole from the very people you swore to help. You used my money to destroy your sister." "Mom, please," Melanie sobbed, dropping the arrogant facade and begging like a terrified child. "I am sorry. I will pay it back. Just write the check." Diana stood up. For the first time in my life, she looked incredibly frail. "I will not write a single check," Diana stated, her voice devoid of any warmth or maternal affection. "I will not call my legal team. You made your choices, Melanie. You built this fraudulent life, and now you are going to pay the exact price the federal government demands. You are on your own." The absolute rejection from the one person who had always shielded her from consequences broke Melanie completely. The terror in her eyes instantly morphed into pure, venomous rage. "You are a monster!" Melanie screamed as the IRS agents practically lifted her off the floor to haul her away. "You are a cold, selfish nightmare. I hate you. I have always hated you." Her vicious insults faded into the hallway as the agents dragged her through the side exit, the heavy doors slamming shut behind them. The sudden silence in the Hamptons Country Club was deafening. The spectacular winter gala was officially over. The billionaire investors and high society elites had seen enough. Fearing that any association with the arrested criminals would trigger an IRS audit of their own accounts, the wealthy guests practically sprinted for the coat check. The valet line outside turned into a chaotic scramble of luxury vehicles fleeing the scene. Nobody said a word to my mother. Nobody offered her their sympathies. The social exile was instantaneous and absolute. Within minutes, the massive ballroom was entirely deserted. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments, the catering staff had vanished into the kitchen. The sparkling crystal chandeliers cast a bright, mocking light over the ruined decorations, the overturned VIP tables, and the scattered federal documents still resting on the stage. I stood near the audio-visual booth, my laptop closed and secured in my bag. I stepped down from the raised platform and walked slowly toward the center of the completely empty dance floor. There was no one else left. The armed federal agents were all gone. The wealthy guests were gone. The desperate villains were gone. It was just Caroline and her mother Diana left standing alone in the ruined ballroom. It was just me and my mother Diana left standing alone in the ruined ballroom. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the venue heating system and the occasional clink of a settling crystal chandelier above us. I stood perfectly still, my breathing steady and my posture unyielding, as I watched the billionaire matriarch of our family finally process the absolute devastation of her own making. Diana slowly turned away from the exit where her favorite daughter had just been dragged away in handcuffs. She looked at me. The harsh, judgmental fire that usually burned in her eyes was completely extinguished. In its place was a profound, hollow desperation. She took a hesitant step forward, her expensive heels crunching loudly over the shattered glass of her drop champagne flute. Then she took another. As she closed the distance between us, I saw the tears spilling over her eyelashes, ruining her immaculate makeup. Diana never cried. In all my 33 years, I had never seen my mother shed a single tear. She viewed emotion as a weakness, a flaw to be aggressively corrected. But now she was weeping openly, her shoulders shaking beneath her tailored Chanel suit. "Caroline," she whispered, her voice cracking with a raw, agonizing regret. "Oh God, Caroline, what have I done?" I did not step forward to comfort her. I did not offer her a warm embrace or a forgiving smile. I just watched her maintaining the strict clinical detachment of a forensic auditor, evaluating a ruined corporate ledger. "I was so blind," Diana sobbed, stopping just a few feet away from me. She reached out with a trembling hand, but when I did not move to meet it, she let it fall limply back to her side. "I trusted them. I gave Jamal the keys to the entire kingdom because he looked the part, because he spoke the language of high society, because Melanie told me he was the savior of our family. They poisoned my mind against you. They told me you were sick, that you were dangerous, that you were trying to steal from me. And I believed them over my own flesh and blood. I am so incredibly sorry." I listened to her apology, analyzing the exact cadence of her words. It was a genuine apology, but it was born from shock and humiliation, not from a sudden realization of my inherent worth. She was sorry because she had been publicly played for a fool, not because she had left me and my newborn son to freeze on the streets of New York. Diana reached into her designer handbag with shaking fingers. She pulled out a pristine folded legal document. It was the master authorization file for my family trust, the exact document she had used to cut me off 2 weeks ago in the penthouse. She held it out to me, offering it like a peace treaty. "Please, Caroline." Diana begged, her voice taking on a frantic, pleading tone. "Let me fix this. Let me make it right. I will call Richard right now. I will have him reinstate your trust fund immediately. I will double the monthly payout. You will have your $400,000 a month and whatever else you need. You can move back into the estate tomorrow. Bring Leo. I want my grandson back in my house." She took a desperate breath, looking around the empty, ruined ballroom before locking her eyes on mine again. "I need you, Caroline. You are the only one who actually understands the business. You are the only one who saw through Jamal's lies. You have the brilliant financial mind my father had. I will step down from the board. I will name you the primary executive chairwoman of the entire investment fund. You can take over everything. Just please come back to me. Forgive me." I looked down at the thick watermarked paper trembling in her hand. It represented everything I had ever been denied. It represented absolute financial security, immense corporate power, and the ultimate validation from a mother who had spent my entire life pushing me away. It was the golden ticket to the exact life Melanie and Trent had just gone to federal prison trying to steal. I slowly reached out and took the trust document from her hand. Diana let out a shaky sigh of relief, a small, hopeful smile breaking through her tears. She thought she had won. She thought money could buy back the daughter she had thrown away. I looked her dead in the eye, tightly gripped the top edge of the thick paper with both my hands, and very slowly, very deliberately tore the $400,000 trust document completely in half right in front of her. The thick pieces of parchment fluttered from my fingers, drifting down to land softly among the shattered crystal and spilled champagne on the ballroom floor. Diana gasped, physically recoiling as if I had slapped her across the face. She stared down at the ruined contract, her mind completely unable to process the rejection. To Diana, money was love. Money was forgiveness. Money was the ultimate eraser of all sins. By destroying that document, I was destroying her entire worldview. "Are you crazy?" Diana whispered, her voice trembling with fresh panic. "Caroline, please stop acting out of spite. You have a child to think about. You cannot afford to throw away this kind of security just to punish me. I am offering you the entire empire." I stepped over the torn paper, closing the distance until I was looking directly into her tear-stained eyes. "I am not punishing you, Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm and devoid of all the anger I had carried for months. "I am simply releasing you. For 30 years you demanded absolute perfection. You wanted a family that looked flawless on the cover of Forbes magazine. You wanted a daughter who smiled politely, married well, and never asked difficult questions. Melanie gave you that illusion. I gave you the truth. And you hated me for it." Diana shook her head frantically, reaching out to grasp my arm. "No, that is not true. I always loved you. I just wanted you to be safe. I wanted you to be happy." I gently but firmly removed her hand from my sleeve. "You wanted to be comfortable," I corrected her. "When Trent locked me out of my own home while I was holding your newborn grandson, you did not ask me if I was okay. When I came to you begging for help, you looked at my worn clothes and assumed I was broken. You didn't protect me when I had nothing. You chose a lie because it looked better in a suit. I don't want your money, and I don't want your family." The words struck her like physical blows. Diana crumpled slightly, her perfect posture finally breaking under the weight of her catastrophic failures. She looked around the empty, cavernous room, the realization of her absolute isolation finally settling in. Trent was gone. Melanie was in federal custody. Jamal was destroyed. And now the only daughter she had left was standing in front of her, rejecting her entire legacy. "But how will you survive?" Diana cried, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "You have been living in a filthy, freezing motel for 6 months. You do not even have a phone. You are a single mother on the streets. You need me, Caroline. You need this fund." A genuine soft laugh escaped my lips. It was not a laugh of cruelty, but a laugh of profound, absolute freedom. The sound echoed strangely in the deserted country club. "You still do not understand how forensic accounting works, Mother," I said, adjusting the strap of my designer gown. "Do you really think a woman capable of building a digital honeypot that trapped a $50 million criminal syndicate would end up homeless by accident?" Diana blinked, the tears momentarily freezing on her cheeks as confusion washed over her face. "What are you talking about?" When I realized Jamal and Trent were systematically draining my accounts, I knew Jamal would be monitoring my digital footprint. I explained, laying out the final pieces of the puzzle for her to see. If I had hired a lawyer, he would have known. If I had moved money from my other accounts, he would have flagged it. I had to disappear completely. The cash-only motel, the thrift store coats, the lack of a cell phone. It was not poverty, Mother. It was operational security. I went completely off the grid so I could build a bulletproof federal RICO case right under his arrogant nose without him ever seeing me coming. Diana stared at me, her mouth slightly open, finally seeing the predator I had truly become. "But your trust fund was empty," she stammered. "My trust fund was pocket change," I replied coldly. "When I left the federal task force 5 years ago, I did not just retire. I founded a private global intelligence and corporate forensics firm. We audit sovereign wealth funds. We track missing billions for international banks. I own 100% of the equity. I took a step back, preparing to leave her behind forever. I looked at the woman who had valued her investment fund over her own daughter. Your entire family fund is worth roughly $3 billion, Mother, I said, my voice echoing with final, absolute authority. My private firm is currently valued at over $7 billion. I am the sole shareholder. I did not need your $400,000 a month. I am wealthier than your entire board of directors combined. I never needed you. I just needed to burn the rot to the ground. I turned my back on Diana, leaving her standing entirely alone amidst the ruins of her golden family. I walked out of the Hamptons Country Club, stepping into the crisp, clean winter air to go home to my son. The heavy glass doors of the Hamptons Country Club clicked shut behind me, sealing the suffocating smell of stale champagne, expensive cologne, and shattered egos inside. The crisp, clean winter air hit my face like a physical wave of absolute clarity. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the manicured grounds of the massive estate buried under a pristine, untouched blanket of brilliant white. In the distance, the faint wail of federal sirens faded into the freezing night as the tactical convoy carried Trent, Melanie, and Jamal toward their permanent new reality. The silence that replaced them was profound. It was the beautiful sound of a slate being wiped completely clean. I stood under the grand portico, adjusting my posture as I breathed in the freezing air. Within seconds, a massive matte black armored SUV glided silently up the circular driveway. It was not a rented car. It belonged to the executive security fleet of my own private firm. The driver, a former military operator named Marcus, who had spent the last 6 months running my counter-surveillance, stepped out and opened the heavy rear door. He offered a respectful, silent nod. The mission was fully accomplished. I climbed into the cavernous, heated cabin. The scent of rich leather and warm vanilla greeted me, replacing the bitter chill of the winter storm. Sitting in the plush rear captain's seat was Elena, a highly vetted pediatric nurse I had hired through my private intelligence network. She smiled warmly and pointed to the rear-facing car seat beside her. There, bundled in a soft cashmere blanket, was Leo. He was fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He had absolutely no idea that a war had just been fought and won for his entire future. He would never know the cold manipulation of his grandmother, the pathetic greed of his biological father, or the toxic, suffocating expectations of the family name. He would grow up knowing only safety, truth, and unconditional love. I reached out and gently stroked his soft cheek. For the first time in an entire year, my heart beat with a steady, unshakable calm. As the heavy armored SUV pulled smoothly away from the country club, I looked out the tinted window. The brilliant interior lights of the grand ballroom cast a golden glow over the snow. Through the towering glass panes, I could just barely make out the solitary figure of my mother. Diana was standing exactly where I had left her, a tiny, broken silhouette surrounded by the total wreckage of her empire. She had chosen the illusion of perfection over the reality of a daughter who loved her, and now she would spend the rest of her life entirely alone in a very large, very empty house. I did not look back again. The legal destruction of the people who tried to ruin me was swift, brutal, and absolute. Jamal, the arrogant architect of the massive fraud, was ultimately sentenced to 2 decades in a maximum security federal facility. His prestigious law license was permanently revoked, and his firm was entirely liquidated by the Treasury Department to pay restitution. Melanie, the golden child, who actually believed her tears could manipulate any judge, learned the hard way that federal prosecutors do not care about designer tantrums. She pleaded guilty to wire fraud and tax evasion, trading her $50,000 Birkin bags for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. And Trent, the bankrupt coward who tried to weaponize my own child against me, vanished into the brutal reality of the prison system, completely forgotten by the high society he tried so desperately to impress. They built their cages with their own overwhelming greed. I simply locked the door. Setting boundaries with toxic family members is never an easy choice. Society conditions us to forgive, to compromise, and to keep the peace at all costs, just because you share the same blood. But true peace does not require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away from the people who refuse to respect your basic humanity. Independence is not just about having your own money. It is about possessing the absolute, unshakable knowledge that you are enough exactly as you are without their toxic validation. As the glowing city skyline finally came into view against the dark winter sky, I pulled my sleeping son a little closer. The nightmare was officially over. Our real life was finally beginning. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own peace? How did you find the strength to walk away? Share your story in the comments below. Your journey might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to finally take their power back.